Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So hi everyone, this is Axel Pearson coming to you live from a beautiful sunny day in Portland, Oregon. It's amazing out, a nice spring day. I hope everyone's doing well too. Welcome to the DLC Horticultural Lighting webinar on Draft 2 of version 2.1 technical requirements. We're very excited to continue version 2.1 with this next draft, which adds eligibility for new types of products and adds on top of the recently released version 2.0. So thank you for joining, and also a sincere thank you to all of you that participated in and provided comments on draft 1. We got some great input on the last draft, which really helped us shape this draft. I'm sure that will be clear as we review the changes with you all today. As you know, stakeholder input is a key part of the DLC process, so thank you for your time and expertise. So today we are going to talk through the proposed updates to version 2.1, and we'll take some time to answer questions at the end. Okay. So here's the agenda for today. We'll start out with some quick introductions to the team that we have on the call with us today. I'll cover some brief webinar logistics, and we'll go into an overview of version 2.1 and the timeline. And from there, we'll move into the revisions to the horticultural technical requirements. And that includes adding eligibility for DC powered and externally supplied actively cooled luminaires, LED replacement lamps. Finally, and we'll have 15 minutes or so at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. So got a good agenda today. Let's keep moving. Okay, so first I'd like to introduce you to the team that we have on the webinar with us today. Again, my name is Axel Pearson. I'm a technical product manager here at the DLC. I'll present a few slides. I'll also facilitate the question and answer session at the end. Casey Holland is DLC's technical manager for the horticultural lighting program. He's going to cover a good chunk of the technical requirements, and we'll also be answering questions at the end as well. We also have Greg Barker from Energy Solutions. He provides us with technical support on this version and many other things. We're happy to have him, and he'll be covering the DC powered luminaires section of the webinar. Last but not least, we have Stuart Brzezinski, DLC's technical director, covering the questions pane for the duration of today's webinar. So if you enter a question into the questions pane, he will be the one answering on the other end. We usually have a couple people monitoring questions, but it's just Stuart today, so go easy on him. Just kidding. But anything we don't get to, we'll follow it by email. So more about questions and answers in a moment. For some logistics about today's webinar, I'm sure you've seen these logistics and rules before. So slides and the recorded webinar will be posted on the DLC news and events page on our website after the webinar. Sometimes it takes us a couple days, but it will be up there. All of you attendees are automatically muted, so please use the chat feature in GoToWebinar if you have an issue, and one of us will help you. Okay, questions and answers. So like I said, we've left some time at the end of the presentation for the Q&A session. Please use the question pane shown there on your screen to answer or submit questions, and you will get an answer. You don't have to hold your questions till the end, just enter them as they come up, and Stuart will answer them as he is available. You might get an answer right away, but if you don't, again, we will make sure to follow up with you after the webinar. We'll also be tracking the questions that come in, and for those that we think will benefit the entire group to hear, I'll read them aloud and our team will answer for the whole group. And so that's going to be the basis of the Q&A session at the end. And you can put in questions as they come in or as you think of them during the question and answer session as well. So a note that questions that are outside the scope of version 2.1 will be answered via email. We won't read a lot of those aloud, so we're going to focus just on 2.1 draft 2 today. Okay. Last logistical slide here. So again, while we will answer questions throughout the webinar, we prefer that you submit any comments using a comment form. So if I'm sure that you've seen this before and this is part of the process, but these comment forms allow us to better track and catalog your comments. So please download the comment form from our website, fill it out with as much information as you can or is as relevant, send them to comments@designlights.org. There's also key questions for each topic in the draft that we've called out specifically for your input. We're not going to talk through those questions today, but again, as you review draft 2, take a look at the key questions. They're in the draft and they're also in the comment form that you download. And so you're aware that they're there and we would love to have your input. And again, submitting comment forms is the safest way and the most organized way to ensure that your input is received and feedback is considered to the best of our ability. We read every single comment that comes in, so I encourage you to use that feature. Okay, with all that out of the way, I'm going to hand it over to Casey Holland, and he's going to cover version 2.1, the overview and the timeline. And Casey, I'll retain control of the slide. Just let me know when you're ready.
All right, sounds good. Hi, everyone. Like I said, I'm Casey Holland, the technical manager of the DLC's Hort program. Glad to see you all here. We've got a pretty good turnout today. And as I said, feel free to reach out with any questions as they come up or save them to the end. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. You know, as we said in the first draft release, but just to reiterate, version 2.1 isn't looking to change any of the technical requirements that are already in place or already finalized for version 2.0. And really, it only looks to add eligibility pathways for new product types like DC and modular products or liquid cooled products and some LED lamp types. So technical requirements that you've already come to familiarize yourself with for version 2.0 will not be impacted by version 2.1. And already eligible luminaires are not going to be impacted at all by version 2.1. Draft 2 cover letter includes the changes from draft 1, and then just for our scope of today's webinar, we'll mostly be focusing on the changes from draft 1 to draft 2 without rehashing of the details that we originally proposed in draft 1, unless some nuances or other details have changed around those proposals. So next slide for me, Axel. In the draft 2 that was released, the new proposals are called out as special considerations for each of those 3 categories that I had just described. In each of those sections, there are a few different subsections that describe eligibility, definitions, technical requirements specific to that product category, information about what kind of listing information is going to be showing up on the QPL, and some key questions that we have for the category. And we'll be looking for that feedback in the comment forms or an email if you want to reach out separately. Both are fine. Both are encouraged. So feel free to reach out and give all the input you've got. I'm all ears. All right, next slide. As for the timeline for version 2.1, we released draft 1 back in October, had our comment period, and a little bit of an extended time frame before releasing draft 2 to accommodate for the holidays, etc. And all the feedback that we got helps us narrow down on the scope for the proposal for draft 2. And March 1st, we released draft 2, and we're about a week and a half or so into that comment period now, and still on track to have the final policy being released in June and effective in July. So as soon as July rolls around, we're planning to be accepting applications and start listing these type of products as soon as possible. Next slide for me. All right, and with that, we'll go ahead and dive into some of the topics, and I'll hand it over to Greg.
Great, thank you so much, Casey. I assume everyone can hear me all right. Get a nod, great. We're gonna be talking about DC powered fixtures here as our first section, our first new area of expanded eligibility in version 2.1. The next slide shows our two kind of types of fixtures. We created some definitions. We're not going to cover these in depth, but really what the highlight takeaway here is some of DC fixtures that we're seeing have a very specific modularity with a given power source, AC to DC power source, but some don't. And so we have a distinction, and often if you read the DC section, you have to consider that it's taking rules into account for both fixtures with and without power supplies. So the next slide here is also no new content in draft 2. This is just a little refresher. We've got basically all the standard version 2.0 horticultural technical requirements are going to apply for DC fixtures. There's sort of two key reports here that are different from AC. So the first is a photon flux test report that is obviously just going to be taken at a DC measurement point. And then the second is a power source report for fixtures that include power sources in any way. So we're going to get into a little more details here on what's changed and why on the next slide. So the first change up here is highlighted in blue. In that photon flux test report, again, this is the primary report on efficacy for a horticultural DC powered fixture. Draft 2 eliminates cabling as part of the testing. We had that longest cabling option included in the test previously, and we got a lot of comments based on that. And there are a range of views about DC cabling. A lot of that comes down to DC cabling is done very differently in different products and different types and different facilities. So we got some really good comments about this requirement, about how it's hard to be really clear and precise for a testing with cabling requirement, and how those test results might be misleading for given applications. And it's probably just best to test right at the fixture, similar to AC powered products. So that's the change in the flux report. Moving on to the next slide, we have a big change to the power source report. So the key difference is we reduced from 4 load points for each configuration to just 3, and in some cases 2. Again, this is benchtop testing or power supply manufacturer reporting. So not a test lab test report, but simply benchtop numbers. But we still wanted to reduce the overall number of tests, and we had some significant comments about how the lower load point testing didn't make sense in many cases, or was not possible with certain products. So based on that, we are simplifying this and shortening the test lab, the test report for this benchtop testing. There's also a slight change in blue on that second bullet point around the language. We wanted to, clarify that sometimes power sources aren't sold by the same fixture manufacturer or sold as a package with the Hort DC luminaire, but they are marketed as an intended power source. And if that power source appears in your marketing material, we're looking for information on how that performs at various loads. Great. Moving on, we have an example of what that report table looks like. This is 2 rows shorter of a table than in draft 1. So we've taken out the requirement for both minimum and a 20% loading, and are just using the 20% loading. Moving on to the next slide, we've got a couple changes around cabling. Now, so remembering back a couple slides, we removed the requirement to test with cabling. We thought that one cabling for the test was going to be really hard to make representative. But in removing any information on losses or performance with cabling, we wanted to provide and proposing here other ways for users of the QPL to get information about the cabling. And the first is a requirement. We're asking fixture manufacturers to include cabling information in their product documentation. This is, the best way to get the information needed. The fixture manufacturers are going to know the various requirements and the range of possible fixture configurations with cabling. So we're asking them to provide guidance, including guidance that would keep cabling losses to less than 2% for a fully loaded power supply. The second requirement is similar, but we're asking for manufacturers to submit to DLC one example of cabling in a reported field that would be published on the QPL. So this is one example of a length and gauge that would allow these DC powered fixtures to fully load a power supply and keep cabling losses under 2%. It's not a requirement, it's not a specification that's going to be expected in the field. It's simply an example because as we talked to fixture manufacturers, there were so many possible configurations, parallel and series, that we thought it was worthwhile to have an example. And we're hoping to get feedback from all of you on this proposed change. So the next slide, we kind of are done with all of the changes now to the DC powered fixtures. This is simply, the draft 2 changes. This is the changes we rolled out in draft 1 as a reminder of some of the other reporting that we have. So we're still going to be reporting voltage and current, and the cabling reporting that we're adding in the previous slide is meant to complement what's up here on the screen. That's still included in draft 2 of 2.1. And the last slide is just our comment form. We have 7 key questions on DC powered fixtures, and we're really excited to get your responses and comments and input on all of these, including how we are reporting cabling and have we improved in a reduction of test burden with the tested power source report. So we're looking forward to reading your comments, and thank you very much. I'm going to hand it back to Axel and Casey.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for going through that. Casey, you're up next with externally supplied actively cooled fixtures.
All right, awesome. Nice to see you guys again. I'm back. Let's go ahead and switch over to the next slide. All right. So just like the DC section, the eligibility section of actively cooled fixtures here has not been changed from draft 1. We're still proposing that externally supplied circulating liquid or to actively cool these actively cooled fixtures are eligible, but those using inducted forced air are not eligible under 2.1. And then just like DC, all of the other non-externally supplied actively cooled fixture requirements are going to need to be met for actively cooled fixtures also. So yeah, with that, let's go move on. So just like in draft 1, manufacturers have to supply or specify the allowable operating conditions specific to the product performance, and those things relate to solutions that they allow in to be used as a coolant or as the the liquid that's actually doing the active cooling in this product type, flow rate information around that, and inlet fluid temperature ranges. So how hot and how cold does this inlet fluid temp need to be maintained in order to kind of maintain the performance of the fixture. Some changes to draft 2 from draft 1 are specific to the threshold qualifying state and what needs to be tested to actually inform qualification to the Hort QPL. And in draft 2, we propose that both LM79 and ISTMT testing should use water as the solution or concentration for cooling. And during LM79 testing specifically, the median inlet fluid temperature, as related to the manufacturer-defined allowable operating conditions, should be used or targeted during LM79 testing and should be maintained within a certain tolerance, which I'll talk about on the next slide. And also during ISTMT testing, the worst case inlet fluid temp, so this would be the maximum allowable operating condition, would need to be used during ISTM testing to let us know which, what's the worst case conditions for these components and make sure that these components are still being evaluated at their kind of worst case thermal environment that you might expect or that would be allowable in that kind of environment. And both of these, median and worst case inlet fluid temperatures, when at stabilization during testing, would have a series of temperatures. So during LM79 testing, for example, you've got to have 3 test measurement points to show that the luminaire has achieved stability. And when at stabilization, there should be inlet fluid temperature measurements alongside those typical LM79 measurements. So assuming at least 3, because that's the standard, you'd have an average of those 3 and the highest of those 3 inlet fluid temperatures being measured and reported during the ISTMT and LM79 testing. And then just like in draft 1, we're opening up exactly how these products need to be tested and going a little bit outside of the LM79 standard, because these products have, a lot of other things attached to them to help them cool. It's not just the luminaire itself, it's a system. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. Some new changes that we're proposing in draft 2 is that along with inlet fluid temperature, you will need to measure and report the outlet fluid temperature during LM79 testing specifically to give an idea of the heat exchange that's going on here and potential savings that might be able to be captured from that type of technology. Also, actively cooled luminaires are going to be required, or we're proposing that they're going to need to be able to self-protect from the cooling system failing by cutting off at a manufacturer-defined inlet temperature or some other process for defining how it's going to self-protect itself. And in addition to that, we're going to be requiring a graph that shows the relationship between inlet fluid temperature along the allowable inlet fluid temperature range and how that impacts the fixture's efficacy or PPE. And specifically for this graphic here, the inlet fluid temperature will need to be varying to show that relationship, but the solution should be the same and the flow rate should be held constant. All inlet fluid temperature measurements for ISTMT, LM79, etc., shall be maintained within a 2.5 degrees Celsius tolerance of the target temperature. So this would either be the median or the worst case based on either the LM79 or ISTMT test. And those all need to be reported in degrees Celsius. And additionally, all of the flow rate measurements shall be reported in pounds per minute. And for all of these things, we're looking for feedback. So make sure that if you've got a comment or any feedback on any of these, make sure you reach out. So let's go ahead and skip to the next slide. In draft 1, we had proposed some electrical testing to kind of characterize the cooling system's performance. Along with that, we had proposed to collect information around warranty and specifically proposed warranty requirements around the components that form the cooling system. But in draft 2, this has been removed because this is obviously application specific, and you're going to have different size components for the cooling system in each application, and being able to have a less burdensome process that also relays useful information with QPL isn't absolutely realistic. So in draft 2, we're proposing basically to remove requirements specific to the cooling system that aren't measurable at the fixture level. And let's go to the next slide. Just like DC, we've got some info here about the listing information that's going to be showing up on the QPL. So on the QPL itself, you'll be able to see the system type and specifically see that this is a actively cooled product. We're also going to be showing maximum and average inlet fluid temps for ISTMT and LM79 testing, and this will be tested data. And then additionally, like I said, we're going to be collecting information about what solution concentrations are allowed within the product. So generally it's water or a glycol water solution. And if there are any limitations or restrictions to which solutions should be or are eligible or allowed to run through these as a cooling solution, we'll be noting that on the QPL. And then also minimum and maximum allowable inlet fluid temps will be showing up on the QPL. The self-protect cutoff temperature will be showing up on the QPL, and the efficacy as a function of the inlet fluid temperature will also be showing up on the QPL as a nice little graphic. Can all give information about actively cooled products and help you compare them not only to each other, but to other product types. And then I think I got one more slide. Yep, and this is also calling out the key question section. So we've got a small set of key questions that were included in the form and included at the bottom of the special consideration section in each of these newly proposed sections, and I'm looking forward to your feedback. So reach out at any time.
Awesome. Thank you, Casey. Okay. I'm going to bring us home with LED replacement lamps. Okay, so draft 2 considers the same 2 categories of replacement lamps, the pin-based fluorescent lamps, replacement lamps, and Mogul-base HID replacement lamps, and I'll talk through each separately over the next couple slides. But like the previous sections, I'm really going to focus on the changes in draft 2. But first, a quick recap. So we've got the pin-based fluorescent replacement lamps, also known as linear replacement lamps, LED tubes, TLEDs. I'm going to call them TLEDs today because it's short and easy, but whatever you call them, what we mean here are LED lamps that are intended to replace fluorescent T8 and T5 lamps that have a G13 or a G5 base, respectively. Then there are the Mogul-base lamps, also known as HID replacement lamps, corn cob lamps, or MogLEDs, which again, I'm going to use today because it's short and easy. So again, whatever we want to call them, the DLC is referring to them as LED lamps that are intended to replace single-ended high-intensity discharge lamps that have an E39 or an E40 base. Okay, so for a quick summary of changes to draft 1, I'll cover the details more over the next couple slides, but here's the high level. So with draft 2, we clarified the eligibility criteria. Like I said, we're still proposing the same 2 types of lamps, but in draft 1, we thought it would be easy and consistent to reference our solid state lighting requirements for LED replacement lamps, but we understand that there, number 1, might be new users to the DLC world that come with horticultural lighting, and instead of having to read yet another policy or follow a link and potentially get lost, we just decided to have it all in one place and explicitly state the eligible lamps in the horticultural technical requirements document. So while it adds some text and length to the section, it's now abundantly clear what is allowed or eligible and what isn't without having to follow a link to another document and read it through. So there's not a whole lot of changes there. It's just more clearly laid out in the draft. So next, in response to your answers to the key questions, thank you, by the way, we are proposing that submitters of MogLEDs report the intended mounting position of the lamp. So we heard from stakeholders that they want to know, is it a horizontal, a vertical, or a universal mounted lamp? We also heard in the comments that we should allow directional as well as omnidirectional MogLEDs. In draft 1, we proposed that the MogLEDs be omnidirectional, meaning they emit light in every direction except for the base side. But we are certainly open to allowing directional lamps as long as they have that Mogul base. So since we are allowing the directional lamps, we are proposing that all lamps report beam and field angle as metrics that are important to people installing lamps. Finally, another great piece of feedback that we got led us to allow a different pathway for the electronics lifetime of lamps. And this is other than the driver lifetime as with luminaires. So I'll cover that in a little bit more detail in a bit. Okay, so there's the high level. We'll talk about each category in a little more detail here. Okay, so starting with the TLEDs, as I mentioned, no longer referencing the solid state lighting program. Eligibility information is in a very similar fashion in the two policies. So if you are familiar with the SSL policy, it's going to look really similar, but the effect is the same. We are still including 2, 4, and 8-foot T8 replacement lamps that have a G13 base and 4-foot T5 and T5HO replacement lamps that have the G5 base. The basic requirements are the same. The bare lamp, meaning the lamp operated outside of a luminaire, and for type A, that includes the ballast. That bare lamp system needs to meet all version 2 requirements, with the exception of driver lifetime. So again, more details in a couple slides there. The TLEDs must also have a beam angle of greater than or equal to 140 degrees. This was proposed in draft 1. This hasn't changed. They have to meet that distribution requirement. Next up are the MogLEDs. Again, eligibility information is spelled out in the technical requirements. There's no real changes to the covered lamps. Still proposing that only UL type B, meaning those that bypass the existing HID ballast with an E39 or E40 base, are eligible for listing at this time. There are still no reference housing requirements associated with these lamps. And so if you are familiar with our SSL requirements, this is a difference between the two policies. The solid state lighting program requires a reference housing. These do not. We are testing, again, that bare lamp. So the Horticulture MogLEDs need to meet the 2.0 requirements, except for driver lifetime. And I mentioned, since there are no housing requirements, the testing is done on the bare lamp. And because it's type B, we're not considering any ballast effects, so it's just the bare lamp operated outside of a luminaire or a retrofit kit. So testing just the lamp, these products need to meet the technical requirements. And new with draft 2, as I mentioned in the summary slide, those MogLEDs must report beam and field angles and report the intended mounting position. Along with that, the PPID polar plots must include or be referred to the tested mounting position for these products. So if the intended mounting position is horizontal, PPID polar plot must show that. Okay. So again, here's this, what we're referring to as electronics lifetime. So we got some really good feedback on this one, that for most integral driver lamps, the driver is not a single distinguishable part of the lamp. The circuitry could be and is often integrated or kind of interwoven into the electronics of the lamp emitting the light. And so there's not a real good defined single element to make a claim about driver lifetime. So working with stakeholders, we created a different but related requirement for lamps. So instead of meeting the driver lifetime requirements, lamps can perform an ISTMT at their own defined temperature measurement point, the TMP, on the lamp housing. They provide a spec sheet showing that the lamp meets the lifetime requirement of 50,000 hours, the same as the luminaire requirement, and that is based on the manufacturer designated location of the TMP and the operating temperature, and a diagram showing the TMP. So it's a very similar requirement to the driver lifetime. It differs in a little bit that the manufacturer can define where they are making the temperature measurement on the lamp housing. as far as QPL listing goes, so the information that's going to be listed on the QPL, not too many changes here. So we're still going to tell QPL users whether it's a linear replacement lamp, a screw-based replacement lamp for HID lamps, whether it is omnidirectional or directional. We will list the base type and then also the product size information. So for TLEDs, it's going to be nominal length in inches, so 2 foot, 4 foot, 8 foot, and also some nominal differences with T5 lamps. And then the screw-based replacement lamps for HIDs must include the product dimensions as maximum overall length times width or diameter if the lamp is round, and height. UL type has not changed, so we'll still list the UL type that the lamp is intended to operate on, but new categories include, well, beam angle is there, field angle for those MogLEDs, and then also intended mounting, so that information will be shown on the QPL. Okay, and with that, we have our key questions. There's just a couple key questions for lamps this time. I really encourage you to take a look at them. One is definitely included about that electronics lifetime. We want to make sure that that is a good approach and makes sense. So please take a look at that. We're looking forward to your feedback there. Okay. So we have reached the question and answer session. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take a second to look at our questions pane. I haven't been looking. And then we also have a shared document outside of the screen that you're not seeing that collects all the questions that we'll read aloud. So hang tight, and I'm going to take a look at this and see if we have some questions we can read aloud.
And while you take a minute to look at the Q&A, I'll go ahead and call out one question that we've had.
Please do.
And that I can prompt, because I don't think we have it as a key question in the draft, but we're definitely looking for information about it. So we had one question come in about, are there standards in place that a test lab should be referencing for measuring the water temperature and water flow rate? So I've had conversations with test labs that have tested actively cooled products, and I am not aware of standards specifically for measuring these things. And so if you know of any information, I'm all ears, like I said before, and I would love to have a conversation with you. So feel free to reach out.
Great. Okay. So I have a question that came in on lamps. Why are screw-base LED replacements for incandescent lamps not eligible? They bring even more energy efficient solutions. That is true. What we heard from stakeholders, we did consider including these. One point to make is that this is a commercial focused specification. So we are looking at commercial operations, and we found that the medium screw base incandescent lamps are most often used by residential users, and by and large, the most commercially used lamp is an HID replacement. There is an exception to that there are flowering lamps. So these are called treatment lamps, and they're just used to extend the photo period of plants. And these are often incandescent, that they have much of their light in the far red spectrum. We, again, originally wanted to include these, but what we found is that because they're the treatment lamps, they're really only used for a short part of the year and for just a few hours a day. So while there is a good wattage reduction going from an incandescent to an LED, the hours of operation do not provide for great enough energy savings to make an upgrade to LED economically feasible. And as such, they probably wouldn't be included in utility programs. Another thing I'll say is those because they are often treatment lamps and focus much in the far red, that any LED lamp would have trouble meeting the efficacy requirements because our efficacy calculations are based on the photosynthetically active radiation range of the spectrum. And so when a majority of the photons are focused in the far red region, that efficacy is, the overall efficacy of the lamp is not really captured with that PAR use of in the efficacy calculation. Okay, but again, yeah, please reach out with more information if you think otherwise or have further input on incandescent lamps. So forgive me, I'm reading through the question pane here and making sure that we captured all the questions. Casey, if you see another one that you'd like to take, please go ahead.
Yep, for sure. So I got another one that came in around the ambient temperature in testing for liquid cooled fixtures. And so yes, ambient temp considerations are something that we're looking at for liquid cooled, the same as we do for passively cooled fixtures. And this can happen in a variety of ranges. I think typically people test at 25 degrees C. And for ISTMT specifically, we do require that if you allow the fixture to operate into a higher ambient temperature than you're testing at in ISTMT, then you'll need to make sure that your accredited lab is extrapolating up to that higher ambient temperature.
Great, okay. So I have another question here and I'm not sure I understand. So maybe the asker can follow up via email, but it's about the requirement or is there a requirement on the maximum switching over lifetime for LED replacement lamps? I'm not familiar with the term maximum switching over lifetime. And then is it included in the warranty requirements? So I think I can at least add some information to the second part of the question, but I encourage you to reach out to us, horticulture@designlights.org. The warranty requirement is 5 years, and so we require that manufacturers submit some documentation that they provide with their products. And so the short answer is it's kind of up to the manufacturer of what they're covering for their warranty. The requirements within the DLC program is that they offer a warranty on their product for 5 years. So I would, refer you to the manufacturer's warranty. Okay. It's looking pretty good to me. There is a question, I think I maybe just answered it, but what is the warranty requirement on the lamps? Oh boy, Casey, maybe you can help me out. Is it 5 years, like I said? Maybe I need to follow up, or is it 3?
I believe it's 5.
That's what I thought. For some reason, I had 3 pop in my head. It's 5 years. As proposed. So definitely, if this is for all you manufacturers out there, if that's something that you're not achieving or think we should consider otherwise, please let us know. Okay, so I think that's really all I'm seeing now. So again, this is not your last opportunity to answer or ask questions. We're happy to answer questions over email, and we will get back to you. And any that didn't quite make it into the Q&A session today, we will reach out to you, and that just means your question was maybe a little too specific for a public Q&A session. So I think with that, I'm going to go to next steps. So with version 2.1 draft 2, we are in a 6-week comment period right now. Comments are due April 9th. So as we often do, we will take some time to digest those comments, perform additional research and outreach as necessary, and revise the draft. And it will, since this is draft 2, we will be releasing final requirements, expecting to do that in June of this year, and then we'll be able to accept applications in July for these new types of products. Okay. So with that, thank you very much for attending today. Again, thank you for providing comments on draft 1. That's super helpful. It's really great to not only get information from you, but connect with people in the industry. Download that comment form, send it to comments@designlights.org. Any other questions you can think of, send them to us, horticulture@designlights.org. So thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.